The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and bad decisions. That is what I remember most about the moment. Preston Vance looked me dead in the eye and said, "Effective immediately. We are terminating your position as Vice President of Engineering." I am Nicholas Thorne, 54 years old, and I had just been fired in a room full of people who could not spell firmware if you spotted them the first 6 letters. Nobody moved. 14 executives sat around a massive mahogany table, and you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Preston did not blink. He just sat there in his tailored Italian suit with his hands folded like he was closing a routine real estate deal instead of ending someone's career. To him, I was not the guy who had spent 11 years building Aegis drone systems' entire autonomous flight navigation platform from the ground up. I was a line item he could cut to make his quarterly numbers look pretty for the board of directors. I felt my jaw tighten. My hands wanted to grip the armrests of my chair, flip the heavy table, and tell him exactly what I thought of his leadership by spreadsheet management style. But I did not. I stood up, straightened my tie, looked at every single face in that room, and said one word: appreciated. A few people shifted. Someone coughed. They probably thought I had lost my mind, or maybe they thought I was broken. But none of them had any idea what that word actually meant. See, Preston Vance was 38 years old with a Wharton Master of Business Administration. His uncle, Julian Vance, sat on Aegis's board of directors and ran Zenith Capital, the private equity firm that had led our Series B funding back in 2019. Preston had never designed a circuit board, never debugged a navigation algorithm, and never pulled an all-nighter trying to get a drone to hold stable in 40-knot crosswinds. But he sure loved words like operational efficiency and margin optimization. The guy talked about defense technology like he was selling timeshares. Me? I had been in aerospace and defense engineering for 27 years. I started at Apex Defense Technologies in 1997 as a junior systems engineer, right when global positioning system guided munitions were changing everything. I spent 6 years there learning how satellite communication systems actually work. I did not learn it from textbooks, but from building them with my own hands and testing them in the desert heat of New Mexico. Then I moved to Nova Defense Systems during the early drone boom. I was part of the team that developed some of the first autonomous flight control systems for military unmanned aerial vehicles. I watched 3 companies around me fold during the defense budget cuts in 2013. Half my colleagues got laid off on a Tuesday and were escorted out by Friday. That was when I learned the most important lesson of my career. If you build something valuable, make sure you own the keys to it. When I joined Aegis Drone Systems in 2013, they were a scrappy startup with 12 engineers and a dream of building autonomous drones for commercial infrastructure inspection. They wanted to inspect power lines, oil pipelines, cell towers, and other places that were too dangerous or expensive to send humans. I built their entire navigation platform from scratch. The Vanguard system was a suite of proprietary algorithms that could fly a drone through a dense forest of power lines in zero visibility, mapping everything in real time with millimeter precision. By 2020, we had contracts with 17 utility companies across North America. By 2023, we were managing autonomous inspections for 60% of the major pipeline operators in the Gulf Coast region. But here is what Preston never understood, and what most of those executives in that room never bothered to learn. 3 years ago, when Aegis was hemorrhaging cash during a funding drought and the board was talking about selling off divisions, I had done something smart, real smart. I had restructured the core Flight Guard patents into a separate entity, Thorne Autonomous Technologies, which was my company. It was completely legal, fully documented, and approved unanimously by the same board that had just watched Preston hand me a termination letter. The licensing agreement was structured so Aegis could use the technology indefinitely as long as the original architect maintained an active role in the company. If that relationship was severed without a proper 12-month transition protocol, all licensing reverted to my entity within 72 hours. My attorney had buried that clause in Section 9.4.3 of the Intellectual Property Licensing Framework. Every board member had signed it, including Preston's uncle. Julian Vance had signed the document without reading it, assuming it was a boilerplate intellectual property assignment that favored the corporation. He and the rest of the board were so focused on securing the next round of capital that they did not bother to verify the transition protocol details. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 38-year-old manager tried to erase me, and how I walked away with $750 million. The FlightGuard system was not just software running on a laptop. We are talking about 11 years of navigation algorithms, light detection and ranging processing engines, collision avoidance systems, and machine learning models trained on over 2 million hours of autonomous flight data. It was the kind of technology that could fly a 40-pound drone through a narrow canyon at 60 miles per hour, dodging rock formations and wind shear in real time, while simultaneously generating three-dimensional terrain maps accurate to within 3 millimeters. When I started building it, commercial drone technology was still basically remote-controlled toys with cameras strapped to them. Nobody was doing true autonomous navigation in unstructured environments. The Federal Aviation Administration did not even have regulations for it yet. I designed FlightGuard to be modular with interchangeable sensor packages, adaptive flight controllers, and cloud-based mission planning that could coordinate hundreds of drones simultaneously. The breakthrough was our predictive navigation engine. Instead of reacting to obstacles, our drones anticipated them. We used wind pattern analysis, structural degradation modeling, and electromagnetic interference mapping, all processed in milliseconds. Think of it like giving a drone the instincts of a bird that has been flying the same route for 1,000 years. We tested this technology in the dense swamps of Louisiana and the freezing mountain passes of Wyoming, proving that it could survive any environment. By the time Preston showed up, FlightGuard was generating 80% of Aegis's revenue. We had contracts worth over $400 million annually, with clients ranging from Dominion Power to Aurora Pipeline to the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Preston had joined the board 14 months before my termination. His uncle's firm had led a recapitalization round, and suddenly Preston was appointed Chief Operating Officer with a mandate to streamline operations and accelerate profitability. In translation, that meant cut costs, boost margins, and make the numbers look good for a potential initial public offering. He had never managed engineers before. His last job was running a logistics company that moved furniture. But he spoke fluent corporate jargon, talking about return on invested capital, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization margins, and headcount rationalization. The board ate it up because he was telling them what they wanted to hear. 6 months in, Preston started cutting my engineering budget. He canceled our advanced sensor research and development program, laid off 8 experienced drone engineers, and replaced them with offshore contractors billing at half the rate. He told the board that engineering was overstaffed relative to revenue generation. I argued, got shut down, argued again, and got labeled as resistant to organizational change. It was the classic story of every engineer who has ever worked under someone who does not understand the technology they are managing. My team was forced to work 80 hours a week to cover the deficit, and safety margins were slipping. I warned Preston in writing that his cost-cutting was risking physical assets, but he dismissed my concerns as technical dramatics. After that conference room execution, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes. The engine was off, the windows were down, and the cool October air was hitting my face. My phone started vibrating like a slot machine paying out. Mateo Diaz, my lead navigation engineer, texted first. He said, "Boss, what the hell is going on? Security just locked your office." Are they serious? Mateo was 31 years old, with a doctor of philosophy from the California Institute of Technology and Robotics, and the best autonomous systems engineer I had ever had the privilege of working alongside. I had recruited him straight out of his doctoral program after seeing him present a brilliant paper on real-time obstacle avoidance. I spent 4 years teaching him things no university covers, like how to make algorithms work in the real world where wind does not follow equations and global positioning system signals bounce off concrete walls. I knew how much pressure he was under, and seeing him stressed made me furious at Preston's short-sightedness. Then came Elena Okafor from operations. She texted, "Nicholas, this is madness. Half the team is in shock. Nobody knows what is happening with the Apex Energy deployment next week." Elena had been our director of operations for 6 years. She was a former Air Force officer who had done 2 tours managing drone operations in Afghanistan. She understood better than anyone how critical our technology was to the companies depending on it. My older brother Timothy called me from his ranch. "Nicholas, what happened?" "I just got a call from Rachel." Timothy was 58, a retired Army colonel who now ran a small defense consulting firm. He had spent 30 years in military intelligence and had seen more corporate backstabbing than most people see in the movies. "This does not pass the smell test, brother. Something is very off." The thing that ate at me was not losing my job. I had survived layoffs before. It was the texts from my team. These were brilliant engineers, people who had trusted me, followed my lead, and built something extraordinary together. Now they were scared, and I felt responsible for them. I drove home to my wife, Rachel. We had been married for 26 years. We met when I was doing contract work for Titan Aerospace, and she was finishing her law degree at Georgetown. She had watched me navigate 4 career transitions, seen me lose positions, and rebuild from scratch each time. She handed me a glass of bourbon and said what she always says. "They just handed you the best opportunity you have had in years, Nicholas. They are just too stupid to know it yet." She was right, but even she did not know how right she was until 3 days later. Preston had scheduled a critical demonstration for Thursday, which was 3 days after my termination. The Department of Energy had a $200 million contract on the table for autonomous pipeline inspection across the entire Gulf Coast region, which was the biggest deal in Aegis's history. Representatives from the federal government, Apex Energy, Global Oil, and 3 different defense contractors were flying in to watch Vanguard perform a live autonomous inspection of a simulated pipeline corridor at our testing facility in Galveston. The weather that morning was typical for the Texas coast, in autumn, humid and windy, with a stiff salt breeze that would test any pilot. I was not there, obviously, but Mateo texted me real-time updates from the control room. At 9:08 in the morning, Mateo texted, "Demo starting. Preston is wearing his power suit. The government people look serious. Apex Energy brought their whole executive team." At 9:23 he sent, "First drone launched following pre-programmed route, looking good so far." Then at 9:31 the messages changed. "Something is wrong. The navigation system just froze mid-flight. The drone went into emergency hover mode. Everyone is staring at the screens." At 9:38 he texted, "Second drone will not even initialize. Control interface is showing a license authorization required message. It says to contact Thorn Autonomous Technologies." Preston just went pale. I sat in my home office reading these texts, my bourbon getting warm. The system was doing exactly what I had designed it to do. It was protecting itself. When I had restructured those patents 3 years earlier, I had built in multiple fail-safes. The core licensing framework required periodic cryptograph authorization from the patent holder, which was Thorn Autonomous Technologies. The local server expected a daily handshake key generated by my private server if the lead architect's employment was terminated without executing the transition protocol outlined in Section 9.4.3. All licensing tokens would expire within 72 hours and the system would enter protected mode. There was no override and no workaround. The encryption was military grade, because that was the standard I had utilized to build everything. At 9:45, Mateo texted, "Government representative is asking if Aegis actually owns the technology they are demonstrating. Preston is stammering. This is brutal." The demo failure was just the opening act. What Preston had not considered was that Vanguard was not sitting idle on servers. At that exact moment, it was actively managing autonomous drone operations for 23 companies across the country. There were Dominion Power's high-voltage transmission line inspections in the Carolinas, Aurora Pipeline's monitoring across Canada, the Army Corps of Engineers levee inspection program along the Mississippi River, and 3 offshore oil platform inspection contracts in the Gulf of Mexico. When the licensing expired, those systems did not crash. They did something worse. They grounded every drone and locked every operator console. Suddenly, field crews who had been relying on autonomous inspections were staring at blank screens, calling headquarters and asking what happened. Mateo's next text came at noon. Dominion Power just called. Their entire fall inspection schedule is frozen. They have crews sitting in trucks across 3 states with no operational drones. They are threatening breach of contract. By 2 in the afternoon, it was a full-blown crisis. Aegis support lines were completely overwhelmed. Aurora Pipeline had escalated the issue to their chief executive officer. The Army Corps of Engineers was talking about national infrastructure security concerns. Preston had brought in 2 outside law firms, and they were all telling him the same thing. The intellectual property agreements were airtight. Elena called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight and controlled, the way it gets when she is angry but holding it together. Nicholas, this is chaos. Preston is blaming the engineering team for system failures. He just put Mateo and 2 other engineers on administrative leave, pending an investigation. He is telling clients it is a cybersecurity incident. A cybersecurity incident. That made my blood boil. He was covering his own incompetence by accusing my people of sabotage. How is Mateo handling it? I asked. He is devastated, Elena replied. He keeps telling everyone he cannot fix anything without authorization codes that only exist in your licensing infrastructure. Preston won't listen. He keeps insisting Aegis owns everything and you are somehow illegally blocking their systems. I told her, Elena, I need a favor. Get me a complete list of all active client deployments. Every company, every drone fleet, every active contract. I need to know exactly who is being affected and how badly. She hesitated. Nicholas, I cannot just share internal documents. You are not sharing it with a competitor, I said. You are giving it to the patent holder who is trying to figure out how to minimize damage to innocent people. Dominion Power Line workers did not do anything wrong. Aurora Pipeline crews do not deserve to sit idle because Preston Vance does not understand technology licensing. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, I will have it to you within 2 hours. The list hit harder than I expected. 23 companies. Combined, they were running over 600 autonomous drones through FlightGuard's navigation system. Some of those operations were safety-critical high-voltage line inspections where a single missed defect could cause a wildfire. There were pipeline monitoring operations where a leak detection delay could mean an environmental disaster. This was not just about money anymore. People could actually get hurt. That evening, my doorbell rang. Rachel answered and came back looking surprised. Nicholas, there is a young man at the door. He says he is Mateo from your old company. Mateo Diaz stood on my porch looking like he had been through a war. He was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt, had a coffee stain on his jeans, and had dark circles under his eyes like he had not slept in days. Boss, we need to talk, he said. I brought him into my study and poured him a glass of bourbon. The kid needed it. It is falling apart, he said, without sitting down. Aurora Pipeline is pulling their contract. Dominion Power's lawyers sent a formal breach notice, and Preston. He rubbed his eyes. Preston sent a company-wide email calling the system failure a technical anomaly and saying external consultants are being engaged to resolve it. He is talking about you like you are some IT help desk instead of the person who built every line of code in that platform. Mateo, I designed those failsafes for a reason. Preston thought he could fire the pilot and keep the plane flying, but it is not just Preston getting hurt. Our entire team is being scapegoated. He accused Daniel Torres of leaving back doors in the navigation code. Daniel has been with us for 7 years. His wife just had a baby last month. He is terrified he is going to get fired and lose his health insurance. That hit me in the chest. Daniel was one of my first hires at Aegis. He was a quiet guy with an incredible attention to detail. He was the kind of engineer who catches the bug that would have crashed a drone into a power line. His kid was 3 weeks old, and the family was completely dependent on Aegis's medical coverage. What is Preston saying about restoring access? I asked. He is convinced Aegis owns everything, and you are breaking the law. 3 different law firms have explained why he is wrong, but he will not hear it. He keeps saying, we paid for this technology. Like that changes the legal structure. I did not sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Daniel Torres and his newborn, about Mateo, who had trusted me with his career, and about the Dominion Power line workers sitting in trucks with no drones to fly. I had built those fail-safes to protect myself, but collateral damage was not part of my plan. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Human Resources, Sandra Bennett. She had the same artificially cheerful voice I had heard a dozen times in all-hands meetings. "Nicholas, how are you? Listen, there has been some internal discussion about your situation. We think we may have moved a bit hastily on the leadership transition." "Sandra, skip the script," I said. "You are calling because your clients are threatening lawsuits and your drones are grounded across the country." A brief pause. "Well, yes, there have been some operational complications, but we would love to explore a consulting arrangement. Perhaps a 60-day engagement to help stabilize systems while we bring new technical leadership on board. We want to work together as a family." I laughed out loud at the corporate cliché. "Sandra, families do not lock people out of their offices and accuse their engineers of technical sabotage." "How much?" I asked. "We are thinking $300,000 plus accelerated vesting on your remaining stock options." I actually smiled. $300,000 to fix a crisis that was costing clients millions per day. Not interested. "Okay, what about $500,000? We understand the urgency. We can even make you a direct advisor to the board of directors, bypassing Preston entirely so you do not have to report to him. So you want me to work around the chief operating officer, while he takes credit for the stability I provide? That is not a compromise, Sandra. That is a recipe for more dysfunction," I said. "Sandra, you are not understanding the situation. Preston Vance fired me publicly in front of people I had worked alongside for 11 years. He treated me like a broken copier he was sending back to the leasing company. And now you want me to fix his disaster for consulting fees?" The silence stretched long enough for me to hear her flipping through notes. "What would it take?" she finally asked. "It would take Preston Vance publicly acknowledging that he made a mistake. It would take the board guaranteeing that every engineer on my team is protected from retaliation. It would take a formal apology to Mateo Diaz, Daniel Torres, and every other engineer Preston accused of sabotage. And honestly, even then, I am not sure I would be interested." "Nicholas, please be reasonable. Companies are losing. Then maybe Preston should have been reasonable before he decided to play power games with technology he has never bothered to understand." I hung up the phone. 4 days after that call, I got an email from someone I had not spoken to in 6 years. Catherine Park at Vanguard Aerospace. She wrote that she had heard what happened and wanted to have lunch. Catherine had worked with me at Aegis from 2014 to 2018. She was a brilliant aerospace engineer, with a Stanford Doctor of Philosophy and a Master of Business Administration from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Preston had pushed her out during one of his early reorganizations because she had warned the board that his cost-cutting would destroy their technological advantage. She was right, and Vanguard Aerospace was Aegis's primary competitor. They had been trying to build a comparable autonomous inspection system for 5 years with moderate success. They knew our flight guard technology was world-class. We met at a quiet seafood restaurant in downtown Houston with a sweeping view of the skyline. Catherine looked sharp and confident. "Preston Vance is the dumbest smart person I have ever met," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Aegis's stock is down 38%. Aurora Pipeline terminated their contract. Dominion Power is threatening litigation. The Department of Energy contract is dead. Vanguard wants to acquire your complete patent portfolio, Nicholas. We are offering $750 million for the portfolio, plus a 5-year position as our Chief Technology Officer at $2,800,000 annually. You would have full authority over technical direction, the research budget, and hiring. Our board members are engineers themselves, Nicholas. The chairman is a retired director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and they look at signal-to-noise ratios rather than just spreadsheets. We have already approved a budget for a dedicated testing range in the desert, with state-of-the-art telemetry and high-speed tracking cameras. We want you to bring your entire team over with signing bonuses to offset any non-compete concerns. I looked at the numbers on the tablet and realized Vanguard was giving me the ultimate weapon to protect my people and build something even greater. I spoke to my wife, Rachel. She smiled and said, "You already know the answer. You have spent your entire life building technology only to watch managers like Preston treat you as replaceable. This is the moment you take back control." The next morning, I called my attorney, Roger Whitaker. He spent hours reviewing the acquisition documents and verified that the patents were fully and cleanly held by Thorne Autonomous Technologies. He was laughing when he called me back. "Nicholas, this is a masterclass in intellectual property structuring. Aegis's legal team is trying to find some loophole, but since they terminated you without the 12-month transition protocol, their rights evaporated into thin air. They have zero legal recourse. They can't file an injunction. They can't claim trade secrets. Nothing. You are completely free to sell to the highest bidder." I called Catherine and accepted the offer. 2 days later, Preston Vance stood on my porch, looking like he had aged 10 years. It was a cold, rainy evening, and he looked completely broken, his expensive suit soaked through. "Nicholas, you cannot do this," he begged, his voice shaking. "You cannot sell our technology to Vanguard. It will destroy Aegis and wipe out our valuation. My uncle is going to ruin my career, and I will never work on Wall Street again." "It is not your technology, Preston," I replied calmly. "Read Section 9.4.3 of the agreement your board signed. You gutted your company the day you decided spreadsheets were more valuable than engineering expertise. I am just picking up the pieces." The signing was the following Tuesday. I signed the contracts at Vanguard's Houston office, transferring the patents for $750 million and securing my role as Chief Technology Officer. The news broke 3 hours later. Aegis's stock dropped 47%, wiping out $1.2 billion in valuation. Preston Vance resigned the next morning under intense pressure from the board. Within 3 weeks, Mateo Diaz and 9 other engineers from my old team started at Vanguard. Elena Okafor came on as Vice President of Field Operations. Daniel Torres accepted a senior engineering role with a 20% raise and premium health insurance that covered the baby daughter, allowing him to pay off all outstanding medical bills immediately. Even my brother Timothy ended up consulting for us on military drone integration projects, bringing his 30 years of intelligence experience. Timothy enjoyed the work immensely, often laughing that analyzing satellite surveillance feeds for a growing commercial giant was far more relaxing than doing the same for the Pentagon. Under constant geopolitical stress, Vanguard launched PathGuard, 2 ahead of schedule, and won the Department of Energy contract, worth $230 million over 5 years. Aegis Drone Systems filed for bankruptcy 14 months later. Now, at 55, standing in our new lab and looking out toward the hills outside San Antonio, I feel no guilt. Rachel and I often spend our weekends sitting on the wide back porch, enjoying the quiet Texas breeze. We have built a life defined by freedom and purpose rather than corporate dread. Preston thought he could replace engineering with buzzwords. In that conference room, my one word, appreciated, was not sarcastic. It was genuine. It was the moment I got the freedom to build something real.